Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. As you can see, we're in somewhere a little bit different today. Janelle has officially left for school in Toronto, which sucks, but I'm trying to work on learning to film myself and also film in my library so that I get the books in behind me like a lot of other people use. So at some point I will do a bookshelf tour, but it seems very complicated. I'm not really sure how to do one yet, so I'm still working on that, but I wanted to make sure that I get this video out before Halloween. And this video is It by Stephen King. I finally finished this book, so now I'm doing my review on it. Also, I want to say, if you can hear occasional noises, my dog will not leave me alone because my parents aren't home, so she's just chilling in here with me because she won't let me go anywhere without her. That's fun. As I mentioned previously, with wanting to do a bookshelf tour, I was wondering what you guys would like to see. I know that a lot of people go shelf by shelf, and sometimes they're sorted by genre, but mine are sorted in alphabetical order, so I'm not sure how to make it like interesting to watch. So I'd be interested to hear what you guys would be interested in seeing. If you want to see some of my favorite books and least favorite books on every shelf, I'm not sure, but just let me know down in the comments below. So a quick plot of It is that it's a group of kids and it's during the summer, and they all kind of start seeing this monster, but all of them are seeing a different thing, because that's one thing that's different between the movie and the book, is that in the movie It is basically just a clown, but in the book It is just known as this evil presence, and so when it comes to you, it's in whatever form you are most afraid of. So one of the things about It is that it actually feeds on kids, so that's these other kids start to notice that their peers are disappearing, and they put together the pattern to realize, okay, there's a monster. And that's one of the most interesting parts of this book, because it's talking about the faith of children, and I think that that makes a lot of sense why the kids would be able to think, oh, it's a monster, but when the police would think, oh, it's a monster, that doesn't make any sense because monsters aren't real. That's about 50% of this book. The other 50% is those same kids coming back as adults because the monster isn't actually dead as they thought that it was when they fought it. So they have to come back and try to fight it again because they want to make sure that it's gone forever. So the main conflict is obviously between these 7 teenagers, which they refer to themselves as the Losers Club. Obviously, I feel kind of silly explaining all of this because if you've seen the movie, you obviously know this, but just in case somebody out there hasn't read it, hasn't seen it, this is kind of what it's about. So the 7 teenagers that refer to themselves as the Losers Club, and it's mainly, as far as I can tell, because they all consider themselves losers. They're all picked on and bullied, and it's basically them against this evil force, It, which in the movie is more so like Pennywise. In the book, it's much more of a broad, vague, evil topic. So this evil is actually plaguing this small town in Maine called Derry every 27 years. Every 27 years, it will basically come out of hibernation and kill a bunch of kids and then go back into hibernation. So that's why they actually didn't know that it wasn't dead until they were adults, is because it has to be 27 years. Unlike the movie, which the movie, It Part 1 is with the kids and Part 2 is with the adults. In the book, it's basically just one chapter or one section for the kids and then one section for the adults, and even sometimes smaller than that. Like, they really bounce back and forth between the kids and the adults, and I actually ended up preferring that a lot more. So the genre or category of this is like thriller, mystery, but I mean, obviously the main category is horror. It's Stephen King. What else did we expect? I need to preface this by saying this is not a YA young adult book. This is not a young adult book. This is very much an adult book. I really do not recommend this to anybody under 18, and I know that myself, when I was under 18, I probably would have heard that and been like, yeah, okay. But there's some disturbing things reading this that even I was uncomfortable reading or I found upsetting, so I just really, please take that into account if you want to read this book. So I didn't want to have to explain all of the characters. Obviously, there's a lot of characters in this book because it's all based in this small town, but I did figure that I should explain the Losers Club. However, I was only going to explain part of them, but I mean, they're all pretty much equal, have equal time narrating and that sort of thing. I was going to say screen time, but it's a book. So I am just going to describe the Losers Club though. So the first person I'm going to talk about is Bill. Bill is the leader of the Losers Club. They consider him the leader. And his brother was actually killed by Pennywise, or it. In the movie, his brother's Georgie, the little boy in the yellow raincoat. That's like the classic, like that's who's on the front cover here, is Bill's brother Georgie. That's not really a spoiler. That's like pretty much the first few pages, and I'm pretty sure it's also in the trailer, so. Then there's Beverly, who is the only girl in the Losers Club, and she definitely added a little twist of feminism to this older tale. However, in the movies, she's much more of like a boss than in these. In these, she's much more stereotypical girl, I would say, whereas in the movies, she definitely like holds her own. And yes, I did watch the movies first. I would have been way too young to read the book when the movies came out. Then there's Eddie, who's basically known for having hypochondria. He's always afraid that he's sick. His mother has it as well. So he's on all these medications for possible conditions, things that he might have, things that just in case, like that kind of thing. I consider Richie the clown of Maine. Not just class clown. Like, he just always has something funny to say. He definitely lightens the mood. A lot of things that he says, I will admit, I didn't understand a lot of the references just because this was written before my time. Plus, the children part also takes place in the 50s. So then on top of that, there's just a lot of references that I didn't really understand. I enjoyed him as a character. I found his dialogue was harder to read because it would always be saying how he was talking with an accent, and so then some of the words would be written the way that you would pronounce them, not the way that the word should be spelled. So that's the only thing about reading his part. It was like a little bit hard sometimes, which made his character more dynamic, but it also took me out of the story because I had to focus more on what was happening rather than just reading and absorbing it. Like I mentioned, this Losers Club is all being bullied for one reason or another. There's a character named Mike, and as far as I can tell, he's basically just bullied because he's black. Again, this is in Maine, in the 50s, that kind of thing, which is so unfortunate, but he was an excellent character to have, and especially narration-wise, because he would explain some of the past things that had gone on, like even before the 50s, before Mike's time. He would explain how people like him were treated, and that kind of set his character apart from the rest of them because they all had their own struggles, but obviously him was a much more worldly issue. Then there's Ben. Ben was probably my favorite character. He was known as Haystack just because he was overweight, and he was just so sweet. He had the biggest crush on Beverly. It was so cute. You know, if you've seen the movies, sorry, I'll try to stop saying that, but the way that he looks at Beverly is just so adorable. I think that his character is incredible, and also he is such a genius. Like, people definitely underestimate him. The last character I'll talk about is Stan. As much as I said they all get time, Stan is probably the least important. He has an affiliation for birds. He's probably the biggest scaredy cat of all of them, which I do not blame him because the things that these kids go through. And they make a lot of references to the fact that he's Jewish. The author's writing style for this book, obviously, Stephen King, so it's very descriptive, it's gory, but the characters are very strong. Again, it's a large book, it's more than 1,100 pages, it's 1,154, and so he's got a lot of times to develop his characters, both young and older, so I did really enjoy reading that part of this. So, be honest with me. Did it sound like I was done? Because I wasn't. But my camera seemed to think that I was. Hopefully now all the problems are figured out. I enjoyed what I said. I watched the clip back a couple times and I didn't feel like there was any point in me redoing it. Maybe if I was a little more professional I would, but here we are. It's going to pretend like it was the same day. It's clearly not. The lighting's different, it's dark outside now, it was light when I filmed the first part. I moved the S so that it's actually visible now for Stories Books. And the camera placement is probably different because, like I said, I had to mess with a few things. So I'm not going to pretend like it's the same day. It is, in fact, 2 weeks later. I've now started university, but I obviously still want to continue with this video, so I'm just going to keep going from where I left off with something that I loved. Something that I loved about this book is that it was just so emotional. At times it had me laughing and crying. It was really disturbing and heart-wrenching, but it was also so sweet to see these kids, and it was a very like coming of age novel. So it was really nice to see them kind of growing up, but at the same time, it's obviously not exactly a happy book. So like I mentioned, because it's like a coming of age novel, it is full of character development. A lot of it is the kids trying to decide what they believe in, whether they want to believe in the childlike joys and fears like they did before. If you read this book, you understand that that is a huge aspect of it, is that they are growing up, but they're trying to hold on to their childhood, and it ends up being important that they do. Personally, with the book, I actually found that the evil itself, worked quite well, and in my opinion, better than the movie. I was quite confused why it wasn't just an evil clown like it is in the movie, but I enjoy the depiction of just all around evil and it showing up as what you fear, because some people fear clowns more than others. From what I understood, basically the clown was like a default because the whole point is that it eats kids. So in order to lure in children, it would take on the shape of a clown, same as it did with Georgie. Another thing that I really like, it happened specifically near the ending. There was really cool timed parts where it wasn't necessarily from anyone's perspective, but it was saying at 7:17 a.m. the storm began, at 7:20 a tree fell and killed this person, like that kind of thing, and it was just like a timeline of events, and I thought that that was really interesting. A few things that I didn't like about this book, it was quite slow paced. It's Stephen King, it's a large book, obviously it's going to be slow paced. I feel like this is one of those books that could be studied in school because I feel like there's so many hidden metaphors and messages within this book. I'm horrible at picking those out. Even though I am an English major, I really struggle sometimes to notice those things, but then when they're pointed out, I get them. But there were certain things throughout this that I was like, is that supposed to be I feel like it could be studied, but obviously if you know anything about this book, it is not appropriate really to be studied in school. The main thing that I didn't really enjoy about this book, that's my dog. The main thing that I didn't really enjoy about this book was just that near the ending, it is going up against the creator of the universe, which is a turtle. So that was kind of just something that didn't make a whole lot of sense to me. Why is it a turtle? Why is it even necessary? Like, I feel like it would have been enough for the kids to just go up against it itself. I don't know why we needed a turtle, but again, maybe that's a metaphor for something. I don't know. I honestly did not look it up. I probably will, but I wanted to wait after doing the review so that it didn't skew my opinions any, because I'm just reading it as somebody that didn't look it up and didn't catch those things, and I just want to be honest with you guys on what I liked and what I didn't. Similar to what I liked emotion-wise, what I didn't like were some of the emotions. It was so sad and so disturbing at times. Like, I had to stop reading it. It was definitely upsetting, and I'm so glad that they did not include a lot of the details in the movie, because some of them were just downright horrifying. And although they painted a good depiction of a horrible character and a scary character, I don't know that it was necessary. I don't know, I found it so hard to read through. Something else, the last thing I'm going to say, is it was slightly hard to understand at times, some of the slang that they would use or the way that they were talking, but honestly I would chalk that up to A, it was written a while ago, and then B, it's also supposed to take place in the 50s, like part of it is. So I feel like those two things are kind of the same. Same as there's a lot of references that I also didn't really understand, and some of them I would look up, and others, there was honestly just too many that I couldn't even bring myself to bother. Was the end satisfying? It was satisfying enough. I couldn't think of any specific plot holes, but also it's just such a large book, I didn't exactly retain all of it. Obviously, I don't think that you could. The only thing is that it was like slightly drawn out, as I mentioned before, but like the ending. But again, it was a large book. It had a lot to cover in a short period of time, so I understand that. I rated this book 4 out of 5 stars. I honestly thought that it was a good story. It was just kind of long and drawn out. It took me a long time to get through it, and I started it multiple times in my life and stopped reading it, and I'm honestly glad that I didn't get all the way through it when I was younger, because like I said, it is very horrifying. Just remember, like, adult warning, there's very adult depictions and gory things within this book. And finally, like I said, there were just some confusing parts in it, like I mentioned before. So honestly, that docked a whole lot of my writing from it. Even though it's only near the end that those things happened, I was still like kind of taken aback by them, and I didn't even really want to finish it. But I mean, how could you read this whole thing and then stop right here? Like, it wasn't going to happen. Similar books to this, the writing style is obviously kind of similar to Carrie, and I know I mentioned previously in my ranking of what I read in 2020, I didn't love Carrie. I definitely liked this one more, which surprised me. But it's an interesting writing style. He's definitely got a different take, which is why, obviously, he is so popular. I would say that the descriptions are kind of similar to Danielle Vega, which hopefully my review on her series, The Merciless, is out now, so go check that out. I love her books. I've read almost all of them. And she's got really good, gory depictions of things, and so Stephen King reminded me of that. For some reason, I think of the animated movie Monster House when I think of this book. I think it's just a group of kids fighting an unknown evil, like that kind of thing. And it definitely has a similar vibe to Stranger Things, which is not just because they share a similar actor. Let's insert some pictures here. It's just definitely, again, it's the same thing, group of kids fighting an unknown evil. So I think that that's it for my non-spoiler review of it. I will say some things afterwards. It honestly doesn't even necessarily spoil that much, especially if you've seen the movies. I couldn't include everything because this book is so long. I'm so sorry that this was technically filmed 2 weeks apart. I'm sorry if it was confusing. I'm sorry if the camera angles are wrong. I'm still trying to get used to this on my own. And yeah, make sure to leave me a comment down below if you've seen the movie or if you've read the book and what your thoughts are on it. And if you don't care about spoilers, stay tuned to the next part.
Spoilers.
Okay, so we are now in the spoiler section of it. If you're here, you've seen the movies, or you're interested to think what happens, you don't want to read it, all that good stuff. Honestly, like I mentioned, even if you watch all of this, I would still recommend reading it. There are so many storylines that I could not include in my final thoughts, obviously. So the basic plot of this I already mentioned, but I'm just gonna say kind of the more spoiler version of it. The Losers Club basically all see their fears mirrored back to them through it, but obviously they don't want their friends to think that they are crazy, so they don't really talk to each other about it, and then once they do, they agree to go after it and essentially fight it. That was one of the more interesting parts of this book, I thought, is just that, of course, only kids would imagine that it's a monster, which I mean it actually is. But if they tried to tell the cops that, obviously the cops are not going to believe them, and only kids could really actually come up against it and fight it. The adult part actually flashes back and forth rather than the child part and then the adult part, like what they did with the movies. And I do prefer that it flashed back and forth just because I thought that it showed the metaphors a little bit better. But basically it's 27 years later. It emerges, continues feeding on children. Basically, Mike is the only one that has stayed in Derry, and he ends up calling back to the rest of the Losers Club and basically saying it's happening again, and they had made a pact that they would all return if it wasn't actually dead after the battle that they had when they were children. And so Mike's basically saying, are you going to hold on to your promise and come back? Basically what happens when people leave Derry is they kind of lose their memories about the things that happened there because there's such strange occurrences that obviously people would start to get skeptical. So there's definitely some sort of supernatural, mysterious part to it as well, besides just the monster itself. Once the gang starts to come back, obviously as adults this time, their memories slowly start to resurface, and that's the thing, is that they don't automatically know what to do and they don't automatically remember everything. And I think that that's part of the reason it flashes back and forth, is because they're remembering things as they're happening. From the few It point of views that we got, where It was talking about this is what I did, that kind of thing, it definitely seemed as though It called them back for revenge. So it wasn't just, oh yeah, It's out again and had forgotten about them. They actually put up such a fight against It that It had almost died and was so enraged that 27 years later, when it emerged, it just immediately wanted revenge. Unfortunately, Stan could not handle the pressure After everything that they'd been through, when he got the call from Mike, it seemed like he remembered more than everybody else, and he actually ended up killing himself rather than returning to Derry. So like I mentioned, the kids had basically assumed that It was dead when they did the original battle, but it wasn't, obviously. It does emerge every 27 years, and they do figure out that pattern, so that's, Mike was kind of on guard once the 27-year point came, and sure enough, it did re-emerge. Like I mentioned, it was much less clown-based than the movie. I just want to go into a little more detail on that because I said I found it so interesting how their own fears are mirrored back to them. An example is that Mike, as a baby, was pecked by a crow. He was outside in like a crib kind of thing, and the crow was on the edge and was pecking at him. And so then he sees it as this giant bird, like humongous, because obviously to a baby, the bird would be really big. They almost never talk about it as a clown. It's definitely just more this evil presence, but I thought that that was so interesting considering that like 98% of the point of the movie is that it is a clown. The book is definitely more childlike than the movie. They're like laughing after the battle and stuff, and I thought that that was really nice and interesting just because it kind of made it more lighthearted and it really depicted better that they were kids. As time goes on, they start laughing less, and I feel like that shows them growing up more. Because of what a large novel it is, obviously there's a lot more background stuff, and it's talking about where it came from and where it originated, and it's basically, it is like prehistoric, like one of the first things about planet Earth. I thought that it was interesting to read it from that point of view because I had never really thought of where this monster would have stemmed from, and it also seems like in the movie they did it a bit differently, but I'm not going to get into that. It also talked a lot about the faith of kids. That was definitely a main theme in this novel because it was talking about the kids have faith that they'll actually win, and that is why they can stand up to it, and that's why they even have a fighting chance. Because an adult would see this supernatural character and be like, oh, no. But the kids look at it as something that they think that they can do together, and by truly believing in it, they get really close. There was a really cool symbolism at some point in this book where they referred to Derry as it. So basically, the town is the evil because the kids start to notice that the residents are kind of just watching everything happen, and it's almost like they're brainwashed, like they just don't care. So then it was like overlooking everything and being like, it's this place. Like this place is evil, this place is it, even though there is the overlying monster. When the adults go back to battle it again, Eddie's arm gets broken again like it did when he was a child, and I wished that they had kept that in the movie just because I thought that that was such an interesting parallel because it showed them fighting as kids and fighting as adults and having to take the same path down into the sewers and having to struggle in the same ways because Eddie's arm was broken. I just thought that that was really interesting, and I wish that they had kept that. Like I mentioned, enjoying how it goes back and forth between adult and childhood. It's actually really similar to Lauren Oliver's Replica duology, which I love. I highly recommend because there's 2 stories on it. Again, I mentioned it in my 2020 What I Read ranking book. It was a struggle. In my ranking what I read in 2020 video, because it goes back and forth between 2 stories if you choose to read it that way, which I did. I thought that it was really interesting that it went back and forth between the children and the adults, but I definitely understand movie-wise why it was easier to just do the kids in one movie and the adults in the other. Obviously, one of the most famous parts of this novel is when Eddie says gazebo instead of placebo when he's talking about his medicine, because he is starting to catch on that this medicine actually might not be doing anything and it's all fake and it's a scam kind of thing. But one way that that was connected to like the main storyline of it is that Eddie, believing that his asthma inhaler would hurt it, sprays it, and again, it's like the faith of kids, the belief in it, the placebo, it actually does end up injuring it. But it's the kind of thing that it's like if Eddie just thought, oh, I might as well try this, but it's not going to work, it probably would not have worked. And I thought that that was a really interesting parallel. In order to kill it, there's a very strange ritual involved. It was alluded a little bit to in the movies. It involves biting its tongue, and it's biting your tongue, and then you're trying to make it laugh, and it's trying to make you laugh, and whichever one laughs first loses. It's something similar to that. Like I mentioned, the whole actual like killing it part and the whole creator of the universe thing was all very confusing to me personally. I feel like there's a lot of metaphors involved that I did not understand. And I kind of wondered at the same time if by trying to make you laugh it was a little bit similar to the whole clown parallel, because it's like clowns are supposed to be funny, which, I mean, Pennywise the clown is not so funny. Right at the end, they start referring to it as she, because it is actually pregnant and has a bunch of eggs around, and so they have to go around and also kill the eggs while killing it because they don't want a whole bunch of its running around. Basically, it took the shape of a spider near the end, and a little bit similar to like it did in the second movie. And I have to say that one of the best imagery descriptions in this book was when its web was falling down as they were killing it and the web was falling from the sky. It just really, I found it was so interesting. Similar to the movie, Eddie does end up dying near the end when they're adults and they're fighting it. In the movie, he gets stabbed in the chest. In the book, he gets his arm ripped off. And I wish that they had kept that in the movie. I don't like gory things, so me saying, oh, I wish they broke his arm, I wish that they ripped his arm off, very strange for me. But I thought that it was such an interesting parallel, considering that the movie series and the book started with Georgie dying and getting his arm ripped off, and so then at the end, Eddie dying, getting his arm ripped off. I thought that that would have been a really good parallel for them to do, but again, unfortunately it was not in the movie. They actually do end up killing it once they are adults, and immediately they all kind of start to forget each other. It's a little bit similar to dementia, except it's so fast-paced. Like within 24 hours, they're forgetting each other's last names and kind of forgetting that they exist. And they're all talking to each other, and it's kind of like, oh, like, I'll remember you. And it's like, oh, I'll remember you too. But both of them are kind of looking at each other and knowing that they probably won't, and this might be their last conversation. And it was just really sad to read that part of it. Some of my final thoughts about this book. One of the last things that I'll say is that I all of a sudden wondered if part of the reason they say it is because they don't necessarily remember what happened. Because near the end, they're saying, when they're talking to each other and having that conversation, like I mentioned, where they're realizing they're starting to forget things, they're like, do you remember when it happened, blah, blah, blah. And so it's almost like they don't remember what it is, but they know that something happened. And so then I wonder if that's kind of why they say it. There's a strange symbol on its door when they're going down into the lair that was actually like even drawn out in the book, but I assumed it would be important or brought up at some point, and it wasn't. So again, maybe that's something that I need to look up. I think it probably is. But yeah, I was like, okay, need to remember this symbol, and I was trying to study it, trying to figure out what it was, and then it just like wasn't brought up again. So I will just say that this was a great book. It was definitely worth reading. I finally checked it off my bucket list. I've wanted to read this book forever, and I've started reading it 3 or 4 times, and I'm so proud of myself and so happy that I got through it. To somebody, this may not seem like a big accomplishment if you read a lot of books in a year or you read a lot of large books, but yeah, I really enjoyed this book. I'm going to give the pointer that if you find it hard to read through because it's just dark and it's kind of confusing and Stephen King is quite in-depth, that what I would do is read the book when I felt like it, but then I'd also read other books in between. Obviously, that's part of the reason it took me so long to get through, but I did find it was a more enjoyable way of reading it because I wasn't forcing myself to get through it, and then I could also read something a little more lighthearted at the same time. I'm going to be honest, none of the books I read are very lighthearted, but a little more so than this one. If you enjoyed the movies, you will definitely enjoy this book. If you enjoy Stranger Things, you will enjoy this book and the movies if you have not seen them. It's definitely the same vibe, obviously, but this one is more in-depth, duh, because it is ginormous. So if you fell in love with the movies, it is definitely worth giving this book a shot. If you really liked the movies, I personally really liked the movies, but I didn't consider myself loving them. I actually watched the first one 3 times before I even enjoyed it. I'm going to be honest, didn't really pay attention the first time, didn't really pay attention the second time, 3rd time through I was like, this isn't bad, 4th time through, loved it. I really, really, really wanted to like it, and I'm so happy that I eventually did. Everybody liked it, it was right up my alley, I couldn't understand why. Honestly, completely my fault, just had to pay attention. So I think that that's it for this crazy, hectic book review. Please leave me a comment down below. Let me know what your thoughts are, if you've read it, that kind of thing, like I mentioned before. And let me know if you have any ideas on some of the things I mentioned that didn't make sense to me, or some of the metaphors that you noticed in this series, because I would be totally interested in hearing them. I love when things get explained, even though I don't necessarily pick them up myself. When somebody mentions them, I find it so fascinating. Part of the reason I like Eminem lyrics, looking up the meanings of them. Anyways, I think that that's all for today's video. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Check out my YouTube and also my TikTok, because sometimes I post behind the scenes stuff there. And I think that that's everything. I will see you guys next time. Bye, guys! So every 27 years, it will basically come out of hibernation. Ooh, thumbnail.